There was a motorcycle so dangerous, so deadly, and so out of control that riders nicknamed it the Widowmaker. Not because it looked scary, not because of marketing hype, but because it actually killed people who rode it. That bike was the 1972 Kawasaki H2 Mach IV, a 750cc two-stroke triple, so violent that experienced riders called it an accident waiting to happen. A motorcycle so uncontrollable that Kawasaki had to install 2 steering dampers just to keep riders from dying in straight lines. Launched in 1972, the H2 was so fast it could run 12-second quarter miles. But it was also so dangerous that insurance companies in some countries refused to cover it. Racing tracks banned it from amateur events. Even motorcycle magazines warned readers not to buy it unless they had considerable riding experience. So, why did this motorcycle become both a legend and a death trap? Why did Kawasaki build something they knew would hurt people? And how did a bike designed to be the fastest thing on 2 wheels end up being remembered more for the bodies it left behind? In this video, you'll uncover the shocking truth behind the H2 Mach IV, a motorcycle that killed its way to legendary status while Kawasaki pretended nothing was wrong. In 1971, Kawasaki had a problem. Their smaller H1 Mach III 500cc was already earning a reputation as dangerous, but it was also outselling everything else on the market. Young riders loved the explosive acceleration and the rebellious image that came with it, so Kawasaki made a decision that would haunt them for decades. Instead of making the H1 safer, they made it bigger, much bigger. The H2 Mach IV was essentially 3 250cc motocross engines bolted together and stuffed into a street bike frame. 750cc of two-stroke fury, producing 74 horsepower in 1972. For context, that was more power than most cars of the era. But here's where Kawasaki made their fatal mistake. They put this monster engine into the same lightweight tubular frame they used for smaller bikes. The result was a motorcycle that could accelerate faster than anything else on the road, but couldn't handle its own power. The H2 could go from 0 to 60 in under 5 seconds. It could run quarter-mile times in the low 12-second range. It was, without question, the fastest production motorcycle in the world. It was also a death trap with 2 wheels and a seat. Let me explain exactly why the H2 Mach IV was so deadly, because this isn't just about power. This is about engineering failures that Kawasaki knew about and chose to ignore. First, the frame. The H2 used what Kawasaki called a double-loop aircraft alloy frame, which sounds impressive until you realize it was designed for a 500cc bike, not a 750cc monster. Under the stress of acceleration and cornering, the frame flexed like rubber. Riders described it as trying to control a motorcycle made of wet spaghetti. Second, the weight distribution. Most of the H2's weight sat over the rear wheel, combined with an overly short swing arm. This meant that any serious acceleration would lift the front wheel off the ground, whether you wanted it to or not. In first gear, the bike would wheelie spontaneously at 3,500 revolutions per minute. That's not exciting, that's terrifying. Third, the power delivery. Two-stroke engines don't deliver power smoothly. They hit like a sledgehammer when they reach their power band. The H2's 74 horsepower came on suddenly at 3,500 revolutions per minute, catching riders off guard and launching them into oncoming traffic or off the road entirely. Fourth, the suspension and brakes. The H2 had pencil-thin front forks that couldn't handle the stresses of hard braking or aggressive cornering. The brakes were originally a single disc in front, totally inadequate for a bike that could reach 120 miles per hour. By the time you realized you needed to stop, it was often too late. Kawasaki knew about these problems because their test riders kept crashing during development. Their solution: install 2 steering dampers and hope for the best. By 1973, the stories were starting to pile up. Hospital emergency rooms reported increasing numbers of motorcycle accident victims, and a disturbing pattern emerged. Many of the worst injuries involved riders of Kawasaki H2 motorcycles. The bike's tendency to wheelie unexpectedly caught new riders off guard. The violent power delivery would break traction suddenly, sending bikes sliding into guardrails or oncoming cars. The flexible frame would start speed wobbles that riders couldn't control, leading to high-speed crashes. But here's the most shocking part. Kawasaki knew this was happening, and they kept building them anyway. Internal company memos from this period, revealed years later in legal proceedings, showed that Kawasaki was aware of the safety issues. They received reports from dealers about injured customers. They heard from insurance companies about the unusually high claim rates for H2 owners. Their response? They tweaked the advertising to warn about the bike being for experienced riders only, and kept taking orders. Racing organizations began banning amateur riders from using H2S in competition after a series of serious accidents. Even professional racers complained about the bike's unpredictable behavior on the track. One motorcycle journalist of the era wrote, "The H2 isn't just fast, it's homicidal. It seems designed to hurt the person riding it." By 1974, something unprecedented happened in the motorcycle insurance industry. Several major insurers began either refusing to cover Kawasaki H2 motorcycles or charging premiums so high that few people could afford them. The statistics were undeniable. H2 riders were getting into accidents at rates 3 to 4 times higher than riders of comparable motorcycles. The severity of injuries was also significantly worse, partly because of the high speeds involved in H2 crashes. Insurance investigators discovered that the motorcycle's design flaws weren't just making accidents more likely, they were making them more deadly. The sudden power delivery meant riders often lost control at high speeds rather than low speeds. The handling problems meant that once control was lost, recovery was nearly impossible. Some insurance companies went further, conducting their own testing of the H2. Their conclusion was damning. The motorcycle was fundamentally unsafe for street use and should never have been approved for sale to the general public. But here's where the story gets really dark. Instead of addressing the safety concerns, Kawasaki's response was to pressure insurance companies to keep quiet about their findings. They threatened legal action and suggested that criticizing the H2 was damaging their business unfairly. By 1975, the carnage had attracted government attention. The National Highway Traffic Safety Administration began investigating motorcycle safety in general, but the Kawasaki H2 kept appearing in their accident reports with alarming frequency. European governments went further. Several countries implemented regulations that effectively banned the importation of high-performance two-stroke motorcycles, specifically targeting bikes like the H2. The justification was simple: they were too dangerous for public roads. Environmental concerns also played a role. The H2's two-stroke engine produced enormous amounts of pollution and noise, making it an easy target for regulators looking to crack down on motorcycles in general. But the real pressure came from lawyers. Personal injury lawsuits against Kawasaki were mounting, with plaintiffs arguing that the company had knowingly sold a defective and dangerous product. The legal costs were starting to exceed the profits from H2 sales. Kawasaki made some hasty modifications to the 1975 model, trying to address the worst safety issues. They improved the frame slightly, upgraded the brakes, and modified the power delivery. But it was too little, too late. The writing was on the wall for big two-stroke street bikes. Between the safety concerns, environmental regulations, and insurance problems, their days were numbered. Here's the most shocking part of this story. Even as the evidence mounted that the H2 was genuinely dangerous, Kawasaki continued to market it as a performance bike rather than acknowledge the safety issues. Their advertising emphasized speed and power, with slogans like "the fastest thing on two wheels" and "of all the world's production models, it's faster than anything." They never mentioned the steering dampers, the handling problems, or the accident statistics. When motorcycle magazines published critical reviews highlighting the H2's dangers, Kawasaki threatened to pull their advertising. Several publications toned down their criticism rather than lose the revenue. Dealerships were instructed to downplay safety concerns and focus on performance when talking to potential customers. Sales staff were specifically trained not to mention the Widowmaker nickname or discuss accident rates. But riders knew the truth. Online forums and motorcycle clubs shared stories about H2 crashes, mechanical failures, and near-death experiences. The bike's reputation grew darker, even as Kawasaki tried to maintain its image as a performance legend. Production of the H2 Mach IV ended in 1975, not because Kawasaki suddenly developed a conscience, but because they had no choice. The combination of legal pressure, insurance problems, and regulatory scrutiny made continuing production impossible. The last H2s rolled off the assembly line amid a haze of controversy and legal challenges. Kawasaki quietly moved away from large displacement two-stroke street bikes, focusing instead on four-stroke technology that was safer and more controllable. But they never officially acknowledged that the H2 was fundamentally flawed. No recall was issued, no safety bulletin was published. No apology was offered to the families of riders who died. Instead, Kawasaki allowed the H2 to fade into history, hoping that time would erase the memory of their deadly mistake. Today, 50 years later, the Kawasaki H2 Mach IV is remembered as a classic. Collector values have skyrocketed, with clean examples selling for $25,000 to $45,000 at auction. Motorcycle enthusiasts speak fondly of its raw power and authentic two-stroke character. But here's what they don't talk about: the actual death toll. Precise numbers are impossible to determine because motorcycle accident statistics from the 1970s weren't comprehensive, and manufacturers weren't required to track safety data the way they are today. But conservative estimates suggest that H2-related accidents killed dozens of riders and seriously injured hundreds more. Those aren't just statistics. Those are real people whose lives were cut short by a motorcycle that should never have been built the way it was. The most shocking part? Kawasaki learned nothing from this tragedy. When they revived the H2 name for their modern supercharged superbike, they deliberately referenced the dangerous original, using the Widowmaker reputation as a marketing tool rather than acknowledging the real suffering it represented. So here's the shocking truth about the Kawasaki H2 Mach IV that the company hopes you'll never learn. It wasn't just a dangerous motorcycle. It was a knowingly defective product that Kawasaki continued to manufacture and sell even after they understood it was killing people. The engineering flaws weren't accidents or oversights. They were the predictable result of putting a powerful engine into an inadequate chassis and ignoring the consequences. The Widowmaker nickname wasn't colorful marketing. It was a literal description of what the motorcycle did to riders who trusted Kawasaki's engineering. And the legend of the H2 as a classic performance bike? That's just successful historical revisionism that erases the real human cost of corporate irresponsibility. The H2 Mach IV represents everything wrong with the motorcycle industry's approach to safety in the 1970s. Manufacturers prioritized performance and profit over rider welfare, and people died as a result. Today's motorcycles are safer because regulators eventually forced manufacturers to care about safety. But it took years of preventable deaths and injuries to get there. The Kawasaki H2 Mach IV wasn't just fast. It wasn't just powerful. It was a death machine that earned its reputation the hard way, one rider at a time. Now I want to hear from you. Did you know about the H2's deadly reputation? Have you ever ridden one of these machines? Do you think manufacturers today do enough to prioritize safety over performance? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's have an honest discussion about the real cost of motorcycle performance and whether the industry has learned from tragedies like the H2 Mach IV. Hit like if this opened your eyes to the dark side of motorcycle history. Subscribe for more shocking truths about the motorcycles we thought we knew. And remember, sometimes legends are built on a foundation of tragedy. The Kawasaki H2 Mach IV is proof that speed without safety isn't progress, it's just organized chaos with two wheels.